Hi, good morning and welcome. This is Abby with Woven Homeschool, and I have with me this morning Jen McKinnon of practicalbydefault.com. So this live is unannounced, but I am jumping on this morning to hopefully share the first of many of what I'm calling my homeschool story. So what my goal with this as a new homeschooling parent, I always really felt a lot of self-doubt and worried about what was normal and what wasn't normal. And what really helped me when I was first beginning my homeschool journey, and what still helps me now when I'm smack dab in the middle of it, is to hear perspective from other homeschooling parents. So you may have seen me share this at a couple different times. I had really wanted to share homeschool stories from a variety of parents, so you weren't just hearing from me, so that you could get windows into other people's homeschooling lives, hear some of their challenges, some of their lessons learned, some of the blessings, and some of the good things about homeschooling. So Jen has bravely volunteered to be one of my first guinea pigs to share her homeschool story with all of you. So if you have not met Jen yet, you may have, because I share her stuff and she's been on here a couple times with me. Like I said, Jen writes at practicalbydefault.com. And she is the creator of the Working Homeschool Mom Club on Facebook. You can find that if you search for Working Homeschool Mom Club by Jen McKinnon, you will discover that, which has just exploded in recent months with all of the new homeschoolers coming in due to COVID-19. And she is also the creator of the Working Homeschool Mom Coffee Club, which is a small, intimate, paid group where we can get, monthly workshops and resources for trying to work and homeschool at the same time, just providing some things for that unique journey. So thank you, Jen, for coming on this morning and for being willing to share some of your stories. So I asked Jen, what sorts of things she might want to talk about. And she had a really interesting story to share about how you began homeschooling. So I will let you take that away. Tell me about what happened there.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. It's great. And it is not super early here. So I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. For those of you that don't know me, and I know a couple of people are like, boy, you have an accent. I'm like, I do? Yeah, I always wanted an accent. So I was never going to homeschool. I'm one of those parents, homeschooling. I had a friend, I should say, that homeschooled her son. And then I had another friend who was just kind of starting when my children were little. But I was never going to homeschool. And obviously, life had different plans. And it's funny because when Abigail asked me to do this interview with you guys, and as she mentioned, we have a lot of brand new homeschoolers coming into our group. I'm reaching out and helping them. And one of the most common fears that homeschooling parents or going to be homeschooling parents have is teaching their kids to read. They have this major fear, what if I fail? What if I can't teach my kids to read? And so I was thinking, and I reached out to another homeschooler who's been homeschooling the whole time and has been in the homeschool community working online for over 10 years. That's Lisa Fletcher from the Canadian Homeschooler. I said, I don't really get it. I never had that fear. I never had the fear that I couldn't teach my kids to read. Why is it so scary? Why is it so difficult? Because I wanted to be empathetic and I wanted to understand. But sometimes we ask these questions and we're scared to ask the question in the wrong place, right? I mean, what if it makes us look stupid? What if it makes us look mean? What if, we have these fears? And I know a lot of you have those same fears. You're getting started. What if I ask the wrong question? And Lisa was great. She's like, she actually struggled teaching one of her children to read. And she said, we are taught that school is going to teach our kids to read. Teacher, with all the letters behind their name. And I was like, oh, okay. And so it's interesting. So this actually ties into my personal story of how we got started homeschooling. Because this week, 13 years later, I graduated my son this year. I realized why we got started in homeschooling. So don't be surprised if it's not until you look back on your homeschool journey that you realize, oh, I had this aha moment. And it kicks in many years later. So I took my school or my kid to public school. He was going to public school, and it was the day that you registered, right? So I don't know how it works, and you guys have to realize it's 13 years. The public school system has come a long way since then. The class sizes are much smaller. The teachers are not as overwhelmed. They have come a long way, and we even have a new preschool program here that I absolutely love that does 80% of their schooling outside. And it doesn't matter what the weather is. I forget what program is. It's funny. A friend of mine who was homeschooled as a child is actually the teacher.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And she was telling me all about it. I was like, man, I want to go to that school. But that's not the way it was 13 years ago, right? So, I took him to the class, and, he's sitting there, and he's so small. He was not yet 5. He was going to be 5 in like a couple of weeks. And they do the eye test, and they do this test, and they go through. And so then we go through the whole thing, and I'm filling out the paperwork, and I'm looking at some of the things he has to know before he goes to school. And I mean, like, things no 4 or 5-year-old should ever have to know. But, they have to know these things because it's important that the parents tell them. It has to do with like sex education and, words that this kid is not going to understand. So this is starting to like bother me. Anyway, she comes to me and she says, we have a problem. And I'm like, what's the problem? Like, I'm looking at the paperwork. Did I do something wrong? And she said, no, your son knows how to read. He knows his colors. He knows his numbers. And I'm like, yep. Okay. What's the problem? And the problem is that she had a massive class of kids that did not know how to read. They didn't know their colors. They didn't know their numbers, because that's why we send them to school, right? She's like, I don't have time to be, like, she said, if he's in my class, he's going to be a troublemaker because he knows all these things. He's going to be bored. And at that time, they didn't bump them ahead. You had to stay in the grade you were in. She's like, why don't you homeschool? And I was like, she has got to be out of her mind. I will kill this child. My son is adorable and amazing, and he's headstrong. And he's so much like me. We butt heads, for 13 years, we've been butting heads. And it's great because we've grown. But in that moment, I was like, I have a daughter who's 22 months younger. This kid never stops. There's no way I'm going to be able to teach this kid. So that's how we got started. I went home. I told my husband. He said, try it. And then we talked about it. And, I tried to reach out to friends. And I had friends who were just graduating their son. Some people, when they're done, they don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right.
And then you have friends who are homeschooling, but they don't want to talk about it either for various reasons. Are they going to be judged? They don't want to answer questions. And then you have the friend like me who talks about it all the time. But I didn't have that friend. So, I was really kind of like thrown into the deep end. I didn't do what most new homeschooling parents do. The internet was not what it was then. I don't even know. I think we had one computer. I mean, I didn't research, and I replicated school at home. But talking to Abigail, I realized why my son knew how to do that. And it's because, now you guys are going to find this really kind of funny. Most new homeschoolers come in and they're terrified they can't teach their kids to read, right? My fear, because when I was in public school, I had to work really, really hard, like super hard, to get a passing grade. School was not easy. Back then, 50 was pass, 75 was like good, 100 was like great. And most things I had to like study and work my butt off to get 75. And I didn't want my kids to be behind. So I didn't realize I was teaching my kid, but I read to him every day. Those blocks that you have that the shapes go in? When we played that, it was like, this is blue, it's square, it goes in the hole. The letter blocks, I'd put words together, and then I'd say the letters, and I'd read them. And, I was homeschooling. But I didn't know. I was just like, my kid is not going to be behind. He's going to know how to read when he goes into school. So I say that to say, I understand that sometimes what we're thinking and doing might seem backwards. And that's okay. As parents, we kind of know what's best for our kids. Even if we don't know, we know what's best for our kids until later. So that's my story. That's how we got started in homeschooling. And it was because I didn't want my kid to be behind in public school.
That's so cool. It's really interesting. When you're talking about, being afraid and not realizing that you are actually kind of already homeschooling. It brought up two things that stuck in my mind. One is Ainsley Armand from Wild and Free. She talks about how homeschooling is just a natural extension of parenting because you're already, encouraging your child's curiosities. If your toddler points at something and makes a noise, you tell her what that word is, right? So you're already doing all those things. You're showing them how to tie their shoes. You're talking about colors and shapes. You're reading things to them. And so really homeschooling is just sort of, you're continuing to do those things as they get older, right? And then the other thing that it brought up to me, I was just listening to a live from Julie Bogart of thebravewriter.com. And she was saying, basically like you parents who are really nervous that you're going to mess this up somehow. She said, I'm not worried about you because you're the ones who are trying so hard to do your best. So it just brought up to me in my mind, like, oh, so those fears, those concerns that we have, a lot of times are almost like a natural checkpoint that help to keep us on track, right? They help redirect us when we're feeling really nervous about something. It just helps us to say like, okay, we're going to keep doing the things that we need to do to make sure that we're doing the right things, right? So tell me then, as you went on with homeschooling, did you continue to feel afraid or nervous that your kids were going to be behind as they got older?
No, not really. There were definitely subjects that I was terrified. So math was my hardest subject. I mean, I didn't get it. I still struggle. I had to get a tutor for fractions, and I knew math was going to be a problem. Thankfully, both of my kids took after my husband, and he's one of those people that if he had been in school, I would have hated him if he was with school with me. He's one of those people that, never studied, never read the book, did the test, and got like 98, and I hated him.
I remember those people.
Rotten people.
That's so funny.
So thankfully, they both took after him there. But I did have to the things, I had those fears that most of us have, like, oh, I wonder what the public school's teaching. Like, do they need to learn ancient history by grade 3?
Right.
Because I wasn't going to homeschool high school. I was going to do correspondence because there's no way I was teaching high school, which, by the way, didn't happen either. I really homeschooled high school. Don't say never, because every time you say I'm never doing this, it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
So I was kind of worried that they wouldn't know what they would need to know by the time they went into correspondence. And I think that's one of the fears, a lot of parents right now, they're crisis schooling, they're homeschooling for a year. And that's different. It's still homeschooling. It's just different than homeschooling with the view of not going back, right? Not that you can't go back. And I remember, so I was very fortunate to find a homeschool provider. She sold curriculum and books and whatever in the next province over, New Brunswick. And she has since finished all her children, closed down her shop and changed. But she was amazing. I would call her and say, hey, I really need this program that teaches French and this is how they learn. And she would ask really good questions. Like, they want workbooks. My kids love workbooks and video. And so anyways, I asked her, I said, I'm worried that, what if they need to go back into public school for whatever reason? How does that process look? And so one of her children, actually, I think it was two. One wanted to be a nurse and one went into the army, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. But they had to go back to public school for a year. And she said they did not learn any French in homeschool. She kind of forgot.
And you're in Canada.
We forget things, right? And so they got in public school and they had to take French for this credit that they needed. And I said, oh my word, what did you do? And she said, nothing. She said they learned it so fast and got caught up and up to speed so fast because they had the study skills that they learned from being homeschooled. They had the discipline, because homeschooled children have to be disciplined. Most of us parents, and I'm a working mom. I don't know if Abigail mentioned this. So I work outside the home. I work inside the home. which means I'm not sitting beside my child every day. They have to learn, they have to be disciplined enough to pick up the books, to open it. This takes time, a lot of time and a lot of training. But those skills, we often focus on the academics. Are they learning fractions when they're supposed to learn fractions? Are they learning history when they're learning history? But really, looking back, I wish I had focused more on study skills, learning to research, learning to ask good questions, how to analyze the answers. Because once our kids can teach themselves something, they can learn anything. Her kids came up to speed and graduated in honors in French.
That's great.
And so once I heard that, I was like, okay. Now, mind you, I didn't get this advice until the kids were like in grade 4 or 5. So I lost a few years. I had a lot of years of stress. But, once we figure out that, and once we figure out that how much our kids are learning when they're not sitting down, I think that's one of the most common pieces. When you first start homeschooling, I say you need to realize that if you ask a few more questions, open-ended questions, get your kids thinking as you're doing things, they're going to learn so much. Nature walks, what do they see? Why is that happening? What do you think is happening when this is happening? Little ones, when you're setting the table, how many plates do you need? How many people are there? You're counting as you're doing it, and you're having fun, and maybe you make a game of it, but they're learning, they're absorbing these things. So if we can get parents to relax a little bit and really realize how much we're teaching our children. I think so. Those were some, that was a big moment where I realized, okay, I need to stop focusing on the academics and start focusing on the process.
I love that. It's interesting because in my time, I'm a teacher too. So, one of the biggest differences I've noticed between being in a school setting and between being home. Now, I know this is a small set, so I'm not saying this is for everyone. I'm aware that there's a lot of differences, but one of the biggest differences I've noticed overall is that kids who are in school sort of have this mindset of like, okay, we're in class, we have to do this. And so a lot of times it's sort of like doing the minimal they need to get by, or they're not really interested. They're looking for the next moment to sort of escape and talk to their friends. And with homeschooling, you just, at least, I mean, I've homeschooled from the beginning for various reasons, but, I'll have to do my own homeschool story sometime. But with homeschooling in general, I found the mindset is more, at least for parents who have been in it for a while, there's more of a focus on just fostering curiosity, modeling what it is to ask questions and find out what the answers are, trying to model interest in things you don't know much about. And as you get into that, like I found my kids sometimes will be like, oh, that's really cool or whatever. Like things that I feel like after so many years in public school, you start training yourself to turn off your brain to those things that you're not naturally interested in. Or like, sort of have a groaning attitude about it. But so far I haven't seen that in my own kids. And I hear that's a common theme among homeschoolers. Now, my kids do groan about certain things for sure. But I'm just saying, like, there's certain areas in which, like, they just show more natural curiosity than you see kids who have been in the school system for a long time. Like I said, I understand that this is a generalization. I'm not saying that this is everybody, because certainly there are kids who are in public school or private school who are very curious and want to find out about things, so I'm not poo-pooing that. But anyway, that's really interesting to hear. And yes, I've heard that a common theme among a lot of homeschool parents, that they want to sort of teach their kids how to learn, and how that's more important over the long run than it is to make sure you cram in all the academics at the right time. Because every school, there are certain things that get taught at the same time, right? And like in the States, we have Common Core standards that kids are supposed to meet certain standards at certain times in certain subjects. But and even as homeschoolers, like in my state, we have certain subjects that we have to teach during certain grades, so that gives us a little bit more of a guideline, a comparison to public school. But then, like, if you look at it broadly, like everybody learns certain things at different times. And as a homeschool parent, you have some freedom to choose when you study certain things. And so yeah, you're definitely right about that, that there's there's freedom, I don't know. And it's more important to give your kids those study skills and curiosity than it is to make sure they hit things at the same time. So before we go, can you just tell me, now that you're at the end of the journey, I want to cry a little bit.
I know, I'll cry later.
I know. Can you just is there something that you want to share that you've learned, or something that you wish you would have sort of hung on to earlier as you went along?
I think, first of all, I think parents need to realize that every parent, no matter whether you're working, homeschooling, every mom, there's not a single mom I've talked to that was like, yeah, I totally rocked everything. I have no fears. I've never heard that. So I think we're all worried that we're totally screwing up our kids.
Yeah.
Okay, all of us. And, so my son graduated, and it was really, really weird, first of all, because it was like, you kind of do that countdown when you get to like grade 10. You're like, okay, I have 3 more years. We got to cram all this stuff in. And it doesn't happen, because you're like, okay, I can't teach all the things, obviously, in 3 years. And I think a few things that I realized is that the learning doesn't stop. He graduated, and it wasn't like, click, okay, we're done. He still writes. He still does research. He still, he had to learn a job. So he had to do an interview, and, budgeting his money, and, dealing with online banking and learning about taxes. And sometimes I think we feel as parents, okay, we have to give them all this information by the time they graduate, but that's not the end of life. We're still learning. And as parents, I'm still learning. And so I think if parents realize that they too should have so one thing I wish I had started earlier was my own hobbies. I wish I had taken that time, because my kids didn't have that example. I went back to work, and that was a learning experience, which is a whole different story. But going back to work, one of the bonuses, or the plus sides or positives, or however you want to word it, is that my kids got to see me learn, overcome challenges, face things. We all have that one job we hated. And you have to go, and you have to smile, and you have to deal with it, and you're gritting your teeth. And so they watched me do that really bad. And then they watched me learn how to overcome that, and, build my confidence and fail. And I think if I had been doing that earlier, I'm really showing to my kids that it's okay to make mistakes, because I have one child who really struggles with self-confidence. I struggle with self-confidence to this day. I'm going to be 40 next month, and I'm still overcoming self-confidence and feeling like I thought by the time I was 40, I would have it all together. I'm just saying, majorly disappointed in myself.
I don't either. So if that makes you feel better.
Like, shouldn't I have this figured out by now? But I think it's great for our kids to see us do these things. And homeschooling parents, we have this mental idea that we have to have all the answers. And you don't. One of the best parts of, instead of freaking out when you don't know, when your kids ask a question, the best sentence, if this is the only piece of advice I can give you, this is the only thing you take away, is just say to your kids, that's a great question. Let's find out together. They're going to have those memories of learning with you. There's so many things I didn't learn in public school. And if I did learn, well, I don't remember, because I can't remember what I had for breakfast. It just doesn't stay with you, because, it's really funny. My son came out the other day, and we were talking about something to do with school. And he's like, I know I did that. He's like, but I don't remember. And I said, oh, it's that graduation thing. You graduate and you flush all the information that you never are going to use again. I thought he'd hang on to it a little bit longer, because he's younger than me.
Yeah.
But, there are things that our kids are going to have to learn in school to get through school. There's going to be subjects they absolutely hate that you feel as a parent, because you get to make the choices, right? Yeah, they get an input, but in the end, it's your responsibility to raise your kids with the tools that they need. So maybe you feel like math is important, and that kid is fighting you. You can take different interests, you can teach it in different ways, you can make it fun for them. But in the end, they kind of need math skills, at least basic. You don't need all of them, because I've proved that. But You need basics.
Mhm.
So, you know, don't be afraid to show them and learn with them. Don't be afraid to have fun. But,
Mhm.
you know, I know so many parents are so scared. I'm not going to be able to teach them everything.
Mhm.
You're
And you don't
right.
have to. Exactly.
You're
Exactly.
right. You can't.
You're
You know,
not a vacuum when you homeschool, and you can model that.
yeah,
You can model what it is to find out. And I think that's so important. I
yeah,
think that's more important than knowing everything because kids are not always going to have a teacher over them. They're
that's
going to have to find out things for themselves as they get older. And so, yeah,
yeah.
I agree 100%.
And the technology is so different. You know, like, what is it, 8 years ago? How long has the tablet been out? We didn't have a tablet through our whole homeschool, that's for sure. So, you know, um, if you had said to me 13 years ago that I would have a laptop and a desktop in the same house, I would have said, you're insane. Why would you
Exactly.
need two?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
So you just cannot even guess what skills and jobs that your children are going to need by the time they graduate.
mhm.
So all you can do is focus on the connection with your kids and the the relationship with them. That's so so important that you have with your kids. And then my second tip would be to focus on the goal. So what do you want your kids to know as far as skills, as far as like study skills and asking good questions? If you teach your kids how to learn, then they can learn anything because
Mhm.
the goal will give them the rest of the information.
Right. And that sort of goes back to what you were doing at the very beginning, even though you didn't realize it at first, when you're, telling them shapes and colors and exploring things with them, right? Like if we can lose some of the fear as we get into older grades and continue that same process of like, I don't know what this shape is yet, but we're going to
Exactly.
keep exploring this together. That's really, really good to hear. Yeah, I really like that. That's cool. It's interesting how, we don't even realize sometimes how those early things are going to play out into, the next,
Yeah.
15 years of their life or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. And you know, kids are so funny. They're amazing creatures that have their own interests and personalities. Like you may think you have your kid totally figured out. I
Hmm.
always get like a little panic attack when people, because I always say to people, you know your kid's best. And then I laugh because I think, well, you know your kid's best right now. But your kids are going to change. So if you feel like you don't know your kid's best, please don't panic. You know, it'll come. It'll come. And, you know, they're individuals as much as we are. We all have interests that are going to change. You know, my son went through this arts and crafts section phase where he like drew and colored. And I was like, okay, he's going to be an artist. He's going to draw. No,
Hmm.
he writes. You know, he likes to type. He likes to write. He'll create pixel art. He does, you know, he does art, but in a different way.
Hmm.
And coding and you know, Minecraft. He would create all these what are they called when you go in and it would like code and different things would happen as you go through, but it was all based on math.
You're right. Right.
And my daughter, who hated coloring, hated when she was little, like, oh, it was the worst thing. Well, she's the artist. She takes art courses for fun,
Huh.
you know,
That's
so
so
you can't
cool.
just give them the tools and
They
then
come out
don't
and
break it.
surprise you. They do come out and surprise you. Yeah, that's interesting because my son was so into Lego. Now I know he's still relatively young, but he was so into like Legos and wanting to create things. I was like, oh, maybe we've got like, some engineering tendencies. We as parents start to like put things on our kids, like maybe this is going to be what they're going to be when they grow up. But then, now I'm like, I don't know if he's actually like bent towards that as much as I thought he was. What really sticks with him right now is narratives and details from stories and details from history. Particularly, he's my like history buff kid, and will come out and like tell me all these things that he just read about in his book. I'm like, history was not my strong point in school, so it's really interesting to see him come through that. So anyway, but that might change over the
Yeah.
next couple of years, right? So we'll see how that goes. But
And that's okay.
yeah,
It's okay for it to change. It's okay because your homeschool's always going to be changing.
right,
You know,
exactly.
that's one of the hardest things is you as the parent fall in love with this particular program because it's so amazing and so great for you and your kid's like, no.
Right. That is funny.
So
I had that experience. Well, part of it was I was just not being realistic about what was working for my lifestyle too. But my kids were just like not digging it the same way I was. And so I was like, maybe it's time to just recognize this and let it go. So
yeah.
it's hard, but well, thank you so much, Jen, for coming on. I love what you shared about, sort of surprising yourself into becoming a homeschooler at the very beginning. So, if you're watching this or if you watch the replay later on, I really want to start collecting homeschool stories, and they can be done like this. They can be a conversation. They can be a video that you submit to me. They can be written stories as well, and they can be an overview. They can be a window into a specific challenge or a specific lesson that you learned. Jen and I are sort of focusing right now on how important it is to just, give your kids the skills they need and focus more on that than on specific academics and, work focusing on your fears, right? So, you can share a lesson that you've learned or something that was, really good or something that was really hard for you. And my hope is that by collecting sort of a library of stories is that we collectively can be an encouragement and an inspiration to homeschooling parents all over, because we all have different struggles. We all have different concerns, right? And so what I want to do is to provide perspective so that you can peruse and find someone who's like you, or find someone who is maybe not like you, but telling you what you need to hear at this moment. To help you get through a specific challenge. And so that's my goal with this. So you can email me at abby@wovenhomeschool.com. You can DM me on Facebook or Instagram. I am a working homeschool mom of 4 kids, so it might take me a few days to get back to you. But but definitely email me or DM me if you have a story that you want to share in this way, or if you just want to share one of your Instagram posts, just tag me at Woven Homeschool, hashtag it my homeschool story, and I'll go ahead and feature that, because I think the more that we can share with each other and help each other along this, especially right now during COVID when a lot of parents don't have a choice, the better. So thank you so much, Jen, for coming and sharing about how you got started homeschooling and sharing some of the lessons you learned along the way. I really, really appreciate it.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and definitely check out Jen's blog, practicalbydefault.com. Check out the Working Homeschool Mom Club by Jen McKinnon on Facebook. And hopefully you can find some of the resources you're looking for there, especially if you are, working and doing learning at home during this crazy time. Yay. Thanks so much, Jen. I hope you have a great day.